Hi, everybody. I'm Victoria Moran, another of the Compassion Consortium's co-founders and co-directors, and so happy to be here for the interfaith part of our interfaith, interspiritual, interspecies experience. And Sarah has introduced already our guest, Dr. Jonathan Dickstein from the Arihanta Institute. So we can just jump in to a very interesting take. We have had, Jonathan, a couple of Jains, of people who grew up in the Jain tradition, but we've never before had a Jain scholar. So talk to us a little bit about how one becomes a scholar of a religion which one may or may not practice.
It's a good question, and thank you all for having me. I really appreciate it. So I think I know I would love, we could talk for hours and hours about this, but really I think what individuals assume when you say you study religion or religious studies is that you're actually religious. But I would say the majority of religious studies scholars I know um, either would not identify as religious, maybe not even spiritual, or they might study a religion that they are not actually affiliated with personally. So I know a lot of people, for example, who study Hinduism who are Christian, right? And so the study of religion as an academic is really the study of religion as a social phenomenon, the way you might study something like culture of a different kind of culture. You might study politics. It's something that humans do that is very interesting and has immense consequences for what they do in the world. And so while I myself was brought up somewhere between Italian Catholicism and Reform Judaism in the suburbs of Philadelphia, yes, I happen to study South Asian religions after all this time.
And how did that happen?
I think that maybe the shortest version is, or kind of the most linear version is, I was a student of Western philosophy in my late teens and 20s, and I found it very fascinating. I think a lot of like the big question, kind of the personalities who ask a lot of the big questions, that's I'm in that category of people as a child as well. And so afterwards, though, I think I kind of felt that the academic study of philosophy or other topics was a little more too intellectual, not as embodied for me as I'd like. I kind of wanted to have experiences to draw from and not simply inference or reading texts. And so eventually I came to being a pretty dedicated yoga student and yoga teacher and fell into some meditation communities. But while I was really engaged in postural practices and breathing practices, a lot of the times you hear things in Sanskrit or you hear these ideas about Hinduism or about yoga. And as someone who'd come from a philosophy background, I get a little uneasy if I don't understand what's going on. Like, wait, what's the framework for this? Why are we here? What are they talking about? And so then I pivoted into Indian philosophy, wanting to study Indian philosophy. So kind of merged my earlier interest and my later interest. And as I studied more in yoga, learning about ethics, at least on paper in yoga, and then in other South Asian religions, you really can't avoid running into Jainism at some point. And it's only in recent years where my kind of academic research focus has shifted into Jainism. But earlier on, I was much more of a student of yoga philosophy, early Hinduism, or what we might call something like proto-Hinduism. But these days I find myself as a Jain scholar and a scholar of animals and religion primarily.
Well, this is utterly fascinating. As you talked about this, I was reminded of a professor that I had in college, and I was studying comparative religions as an undergraduate. And he was a Methodist minister, absolutely just incredibly interested in Islam. And I could never figure it out. And one day he said, I am fascinated by Muhammad, but I resonate with Jesus. And I just sort of worked with that for a long time. And I think it's helping me understand today a little bit of what you're talking about. I love that you studied early Hinduism because some of my questions were going to be about this in terms of Jainism. So my understanding is that all of the religions that started in India came from this ancient Vedic tradition. But at that time, as in other parts of the world, animal sacrifice was practiced. Certainly, the idea of ahiṃsā, as we would see it today, was not a guiding value, but it became that. So, help us with a little history. How did Jainism, which is so compassion based, come from its beginnings to where it got?
It's a great question. I will say what your comment reminded me of this very famous line from the Indologist F. Max Mueller, who used to say, "The person who knows only one religion knows none."
Mm.
And I think it's very true, right? If you don't have anything to compare with, then how do you actually understand your own tradition? So I think I don't know if others would agree with me. I think as much as there's difference, for example, between Judaism, Christian, or as my mentors would say, never say Judaism, say Judaisms or Christianities or Islams. But within that, how much similarity, excuse me, how much difference there are between the Abrahamic traditions. I think it's a decent lens to think about how if you really zoom out far, to a lot of people, they won't look much different, right? From outside of the tradition. Go across the world and kind of debate the difference between Judaism and Christianity, and it doesn't seem massive. But when you're in it, right, you know your group and your proximate other, the differences between you and your proximate other much more than people far away. So I say this is because when we think of South Asian religions like Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, and there are other smaller, less well-known traditions, it's kind of the same way. People kind of think they're all this like one grab bag with like minor differences here and there. And in a sense, that's true. But in a sense, it's to them, the differences are massive, right? So I'm just trying to use that as an analogy. So you're absolutely right. When we're looking at like the second millennium BCE in actually in Eurasia and in northern what would become India, because obviously it's not India then. The general narrative goes that you had a group of individuals known as the Indo-Aryans, later called, who came into kind of the subcontinent from, say, the Northwest, who actually had a language that's known as Proto-Indo-European. And this is a language that actually is the ancestor of Latin, of Greek, of all Romance languages, and so on. So all of the kind of Romance languages and Latin, Greek actually have a common ancestor with Sanskrit. But as there was a movement in the second millennium and kind of turning into the first millennium, those individuals who came into the north of India brought with it their culture and what's known as the Vedas, their texts, but it's an oral tradition, so we use text in a very loose sense. And that was a different, at least as dominant scholarship says, this is a different culture than the culture that was indigenous to the region beforehand. And so what you have is this kind of group of individuals who are coming in with their mythologies, with their rituals, with their practices, like you said, animal sacrifice. This was very much a kind of a nomadic pastoralist kind of community, then interacting with settled villages and towns in India. So why I say that is because you have this kind of ideas that come into the region and then some that exist. And I know that was like a big preface, but to kind of not make it too long is really what happens is around the mid second millennium BCE, around the time of the birth of the Buddha and around the time of the birth of Mahavira, who is the kind of analog to the Buddha in Jainism. What you seem to see is a healthy skepticism about these previous practices and previous culture that was very heavy on external rituals, yes, animal sacrifice, and certain kinds of beliefs. We didn't have fully fledged beliefs in karma and rebirth, but we have these kind of maybe seeds of it. And then around the mid millennium, we have what are known as these ascetic traditions or mendicant traditions, renouncer traditions, such as the Buddhists and the Jains. There are other groups as well. And these are the groups really where we start to get this notion of ahiṃsā and nonviolence, that they actually find that nothing is to be gained by animal sacrifice and largely external sacrifice and external ritual writ large. And so, if you can understand that, you can understand the rejection of animal sacrifice. But if it's packaged in the broader rejection of the efficacy of external ritual, then you can understand why we get meditation and yoga practices and traditions from these same groups. Because it all became about internal experience and internal practice more than a kind of external performance.
Ah, makes so much sense. So when you talk about rebirth and karma, I know that that's something that is shared in Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, but it's my understanding that in Jainism, it's more prescribed, it's more detailed, it's more explained than possibly anywhere else. Can you explain a little about what karma is in Jainism?
So I think what's fascinating is that while most what we would call Hindu traditions, Buddhism and Jainism share karma theories, it's vastly different how they understand these things. Also have to understand that they have other differences. Jains do believe a soul exists. The Buddhists don't. Hindus do. Some believe in a creator God. Jains deny the existence of any kind of creator God. So they would be called, I would call them atheistic, but some might be more generous and call them non-theistic. I've heard trans-theistic as well. But so it's very different. And I'll give you a little snippet about Jain karma theory, but what I think might probably resonate the most with your audience is before even we get this fully fledged karma theory in Jainism and the relationship of ahiṃsā, non-harming, to karma, there seems to be this just general sentiment in Jainism that is very much just concerned with the absolute ubiquity and importance of sentient beings in the world. So there's this foundational Jain text called the Achalanga Sutra. It was translated many years ago and continues to be translated. But before we even get a lot of the technical notions that are common to later Jainism, very early in this text, and we're talking maybe the 4th century BCE, give or take a little, the text reads, and this is from Mahavira, who's considered to be this omniscient founder of the tradition. All beings are fond of life, like pleasure, hate pain, shun destruction, long to live. To all, life is dear. And then a little bit later in the same book, it reads, the Arhats and the Bhagavats, so these are these kind of, let's just say, great individuals, omniscient individuals of the past, present, and future, all say thus, speak thus, declare thus, and explain thus. All breathing, existing, living, sentient creatures should not be slain, nor treated with violence, nor abused, nor tormented, nor driven away. And so why I kind of mention that is I think even before we get into the nitty-gritty of karma theory, what's remarkable about the Jain tradition is I do think they are the first group to really have this really eyes open ethical lens into the world, and generating this ideal, right? And for those who don't know, the Jains are also the longest standing vegetarian community in the world, right? So this is about 2,500 years of vegetarian practice that is not just for monks and nuns, but is almost the signifier of being Jain for the lay community. Like if you're not vegetarian, it's hard to like carry your Jain card. I'm not going to speak for Jains, but it's really like you've really strayed if you're not vegetarian. So just, I know that was a big preface, but Jain karma theory is very interesting in that it is perhaps the only tradition that actually views karma as a physical substance
Mm.
in the world, which is very different than this notion of karma as a kind of mental imprint that you'll hear sometimes as samskara, this kind of mental seed. But in the Jain tradition, the idea is that karmic particles pervade the world. They're kind of all around us. And by certain dispositions that we have, whether we are affected by certain passions, they're known as the kashayas, which is greed, anger, delusion, and ego, that by acting in according with these passions, actually karma kind of comes to us. It's through our activity in the world that karma kind of starts to come to us, but it clings to our soul the more that our action is motivated by these passions. And so early Jainism is very much concerned with how we act in the world. The way that we act has consequences for kind of karma and how it either comes towards us or moves away. But the only way it really sticks to us, I'm going to use that metaphor, is how much we are swayed by these passions, as they call them. And to just put a cap on that, why is all this important? Is because if you understand the soteriology of these traditions, that is their kind of theories of liberation, the only way that one can achieve liberation from being born again in the material world is by shedding all of this karma. So the more that one acts and accrues this karma, the more that they have to be propelled into future births, at which point they will kind of live out the consequences of them. So not only are things like vegetarianism or caring about animals or not committing harm, it's kind of a general ideal. But within the context of karma theory and liberation, the goal is really that it's going to it's going to postpone my spiritual development and my eventual liberation.
Oh, I love it when things are said kind of the same way in different traditions, especially when they support something like ahiṃsā and like being vegetarian or vegan. So you are on the faculty of the Arihanta Institute, which I think is a place where people can take classes who maybe aren't going for a degree program as well as some of the more intensive stuff. So just tell us in our last few minutes about the Arihanta Institute and what we can do there.
Sure. So I'm faculty at Arihanta Institute. We're a nonprofit Jain Studies online institution. But I will say I'm also a professor at Claremont School of Theology, which is a theological grad school in Southern California. They're all online now. But just to let folks know that we actually teach a master's program through Claremont School of Theology, and I can add these in the chat as well, because that theological school is really dedicated to interfaith dialogue and interaction with other traditions to help, like I said earlier, to know even better your own. But what we also do internally to Arihanta Institute is, like I said, an online Jain studies institution. But my primary role there is I lead the Vegan Studies Initiative, which I initiated over a year and a half ago. And this is really a multifaceted program that offers online courses, speaker series, podcasts, and special events that are all available to the general public. And I can share certain links here. We can really see that we've brought scholars in from religious studies, food studies, animal studies, sociology, from an entire spectrum, activists, advocates, to just give numerous perspectives about how they think we can improve the situation in the world for animals. And so, what I like to say is, I bring in people who share a common horizon point, and we're all kind of working towards a certain horizon, and we may have different ideas about it and different methods, but that's who I bring into these courses. So, and special events. So I'll share it in the chat. Please check us out. I think you'll recognize some of the figures who've taught classes for us or given talks for us, but there are others you might not know and who I think are wonderful.
And I get to be there. I get to
Yes.
do an event coming up. I'll put that in the chat as well. So thank you so much for giving us this beautiful look into a faith that so many people know so little about, and yet which is so central to much of what we are about here at the Compassion Consortium. I hope you can stay for a breakout room. Otherwise, we'll all be following you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And really know that. I mean, for folks interested, the Jains are the original ahiṃsā people. They are the original vegetarians. So at least walk away with that nugget.
And that quotation from Mahavira, you said it in one translation, and I've heard it so often. To every creature, their own life is very dear. It's, you know, when people say, "How do I explain to people that I'm vegan? How do I
Mhm.
explain why I do animal rescue?" To me, that's the answer, and it's
Mm.
one that's fairly unarguable, even in today's age of argument. So, thank you very, very
Thank you
much.
so much.